All right, chapter 212, the examination at the Home Office. On the arrival of the two prisoners and the two policemen at the Home Office, they were shown into a small room joining the one in which the Secretary of State for that department was accustomed to receive individuals or deputations, and where we have already seen him in an earlier portion of this work. But on the present occasion, the Home Secretary had to be fetched from the Foreign Office, where he was sitting with his colleagues in a cabinet council. The police officers and the prisoners were therefore left alone together for nearly half an hour in the room to which some subordinate official had ordered them to be conducted, upon the motives of their presence there being made known to him. The crime of which Holford was accused seemed too grave and serious for even the tamperings of policemen. Still, as these gentry are not merely content with having a finger in almost every pie, but must thrust a whole hand in when once they find themselves given the opportunity, it was impossible that either Mr. Crisp or his colleague could leave Cranky Jem as well as the would-be regicide unassailed with questions. The common policeman placed a chair against the outer door of the room and seated himself in it with the air of a man who meant to say as plainly as he could, "Escape now if you can." Holford sank upon a seat and fell into a profound reverie, but it was impossible to gather the nature of his thoughts from the now passionless and almost apathetic expression of his countenance. Cranky Jem also took a chair, but his nervous manner, the pallor of his face, the quivering of his lip, and the unsettled glances of his eyes betrayed the fearful condition of his mind. The poor wretch already imagined himself transported back amongst the horrors of Norfolk Island. As for Mr. Crisp, he walked once or twice up and down the room, surveying himself complacently in a mirror, and then advancing towards Cranky Jem, and with a sort of official importance said, "Well, my fine feller, you've done it pretty brown again, you have." Jem Cuffin cast upon him a look of deep disgust. "Remember," continued Mr. Crisp, in no way abashed at his unequivocal expression of feeling, "whatever you says to me now will probably transpire in another place, as we officials express it. But if you choose to tell me anything by way of unbosoming, I don't know what that is." I love reading like the slang terms from the era. Some of them I can figure out, and some I'm like, I don't know what you're saying, but it sounds fun. Unbosoming yourself and easing your conscience, why, I don't think there'd be no harm in it, and it might do you good with the authorities. At the same time, it's no part of my duty to pump you." "I have nothing to say to you," observed Cranky Jem. "Well, perhaps that's prudent, because I'm official after all," said Mr. Crisp. But if it so be you was to tell me how you got away from transportation, how long you've been in England, and what you've been doing with yourself since your return, I don't see that you could prejudice yourself." "As you've had the trouble of taking me, policeman, you'd better go to the extra trouble of finding out what you want to know about me," said Jem. "You needn't be uppish with me because I did my duty," returned Mr. Crisp. "Remember, I don't ask, but I suppose you've been living in London, eh?" "Well, and if I have?" "There, I know you had," cried Crisp. "I didn't say so," observed Jem Cuffin angrily. "No, but you can't deny it, though." "Well, then, as you have been living in London, and according to your own admission," continued Mr. Crisp, "in course you must have hung out in some particular quarter. Remember, I don't ask you, but I would say it was in the Holy Land." "I dare say it wasn't," returned Jem dryly. "Then it was in the Mint, I'll be bound," cried Mr. Crisp. "I don't ask, you know, but wasn't it in the Mint?" "No, it wasn't," said Cranky Jem with a movement of impatience. "Not the Mint, eh? Well, if you says so, it must be true, 'cause you knows best, but I suppose you won't deny that it was somewhere in Clerkenwell?" "You're out again," returned Cranky Jem. "The devil I am," exclaimed Crisp, rubbing his nose. "And yet I'm a pretty good hand at a guess, too. Now, it isn't my wish or my duty to pump a prisoner, but I should like to be resolved as to whether you haven't been living in the Happy Valley." "No," cried Jem, "and now leave me alone." "Not the Happy Valley, eh?" proceeded the indefatigable Mr. Crisp. Then, perceiving that his endeavors to find out the prisoner's place of abode were useless, he went upon another tack. "Well, it isn't my business to pump you, but I am really at a loss to think how you could have been such a fool as to go back to your old tricks and break into that house there down yonder, I mean, you know where. Come now." And Mr. Crisp fixed a searching eye upon Cranky Jem's countenance. He's trying to trick him into admitting some kind of a crime. "I tell you what it is," exclaimed the prisoner, seriously irritated at length. "You want to entrap me if you can, but you can't. And for a very good reason, too. Because I haven't broken into any house at all, or done a thing I'm ashamed of since I came back to England." With these words, Cranky Jem turned his back upon the baffled Mr. Crisp and looked out of the window. Almost at the same moment, an inner door was thrown open, and one of the under-secretaries for the Home Department beckoned Mr. Crisp into the adjacent room, where the principal secretary was already seated, he having arrived by the private entrance. Crisp remained with the minister for about 10 minutes, and then returned to the anteroom. but it was merely to conduct Henry Halford and Cranky Jem into the presence of the Home Secretary and the Chief Magistrate of Bow Street. "You may withdraw, Mr. said the Home Secretary, addressing the police officer. "Crisp, my lord. Crisp is my name." "Very good, Mr. Frisk." Got his name wrong. "You may withdraw, Mr. Frisk," repeated the minister, and the police officer retired accordingly, marveling how the examination could possibly be conducted in a proper manner without his important presence. The magistrate commenced by informing Henry Halford of the accusation laid against him by Crisp, and then cautioned him in the usual manner to beware of what he said, as anything he uttered might be used in evidence against him. "I have no desire to conceal or deny a single article of truth," returned Halford. "I acknowledge that I fired at the Queen and Prince Albert, and with pistols loaded with the ball, too." "No, there you are wrong," exclaimed Jem, "for I loaded the pistols myself, and I took good care only to put powder into them." Halford cast a glance of unfeigned surprise on his friend. "Yes," continued the latter, "what I say is the truth. Your manner was so strange when you came to me to borrow the pistols that I feared you meant to make away with yourself. I did not like to refuse to lend you the weapons, particularly as I knew that if you was really bent on suicide, you could do it in other ways, but I was resolved that my pistols should not help you in the matter, and I only charged them with powder. Then I followed you all the way down to the park, as you did not stop anywhere. I know that you couldn't have either bought balls or altered the charge of the pistols." "This is very important," said the magistrate to the Home Secretary. "Very important," answered the latter functionary, who, from the first moment that Halford entered the room, had never ceased to gaze at him in the same way that one would contemplate an animal with 2 heads or 4 tails at the Zoological Gardens. "It is very evident that the man was no accomplice in the proceeding," remarked the magistrate in an undertone. The words did not, however, escape Halford's ears. "He an accomplice, sir?" cried the youth, as if indignant at the bare idea. "Oh, no, he has been a very good friend to me, and would have advised me quite otherwise had I mentioned my purpose to him. He was the first to rush upon me, and, I remember now, knocked up my arm when I was about to fire the second pistol." Crisp and the other policemen were called in separately and examined upon this point. Their evidence went entirely to prove that James Cuffin could not have been an accomplice in the deed. When the policemen had withdrawn, the Home Secretary and the magistrate conversed together in a low tone. "This man Cuffin's evidence will be absolutely necessary, my lord," said the magistrate, "and yet, as a condemned felon, and with another charge, namely that of returning from transportation, hanging over him, he cannot be admitted as a witness." "You must remand him for farther examination," returned the Home Secretary, "and in the meantime I will advise your majesty to grant him a free pardon." "And Henry Halford will stand committed to Newgate, my lord?" said the magistrate inquiringly. The minister nodded an assent. The policemen were readmitted, the depositions were signed, and the necessary instructions were given for the removal of the prisoners. 2 cabs were procured. Halford was conducted to one and conveyed to Newgate, but not before he had shaken hands with Cranky Jem, who shed tears when he took so sad a farewell of the lad whom he really liked. He himself was shortly afterwards removed in the other cab to the new prison, Clerkenwell. Okay, so because Cranky Jem knows so much about what happened and intervened to prevent the Queen and the Prince from being executed, they need him to testify, but because he's a felon wanted on charges of escaping transportation, he really can't. So they're going to ask the Queen to grant Cranky Jem a full pardon, which basically means pardoning him of anything he's ever done that he's been convicted of, so that he can be free to testify. But then he has to testify against Halford, which I'm sure he doesn't want to do. Oh, what a mess. All right, we'll find out what happens in the next chapter.